You are listening to The Brycen Show, episode 004 of the Religion Occult series, Sacred Geometry and Mystic Numbers. I'll start this off from The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. The Life and Philosophy of Pythagoras. While Monasarchus, the father of Pythagoras, was in the city of Delphi on matters pertaining to his business as a merchant, he and his wife, Parthenis, decided to consult the oracle of Delphi as to whether the fates were favorable for their return voyage to Syria. When the Pythoness, prophetess of Apollo, seated herself on the golden tripod over the yawning vent of the oracle, she did not answer the question they had asked, but told Monasarchus that his wife was then with child and would give birth to a son who was destined to surpass all men in beauty and wisdom, and who throughout the course of his life would contribute much to the benefit of mankind. Monasarchus was so deeply impressed by the prophecy that he changed his wife's name to Pythasis, in honor of the Pythian priestess. When the child was born at Sidon in Phoenicia, it was, as the oracle had said, a son. Monasarchus and Pythasis named the child Pythagoras, for they believed that he had been predestined by the oracle, or Pythagoras. Many strange legends have been preserved concerning the birth of Pythagoras. Some maintain that he was no mortal man, that he was one of the gods who had taken a human body to enable him to come into the world and instruct the human race. Pythagoras was one of the many sages and saviors of antiquity for whom an immaculate conception is asserted. Godfrey Higgins writes, "The first striking circumstance in which the history of Pythagoras agrees with the history of Jesus is that they were natives of nearly the same country, the former being born at Sidon, the latter at Bethlehem, both in Syria. The father of Pythagoras, as well as the father of Jesus, was prophetically informed that his wife should bring forth a son, who should be a benefactor to mankind. They were both born when their mothers were from home, on journeys. Joseph and his wife having gone up to Bethlehem to be taxed, and the father of Pythagoras having traveled from Samos, his residence, to Sidon, about his mercantile concerns. Pythasis, the mother of Pythagoras, had a connection with an Apollonical spectre or ghost of the god Apollo, or god of soul. Of course, this must have been a holy ghost, and here we have the Holy Ghost, which afterward appeared to her husband and told him that he must have no connection with his wife during her pregnancy, a story evidently the same as that relating to Joseph and Mary. From these peculiar circumstances, Pythagoras was known by the same title as Jesus, namely, the Son of God, and was supposed by the multitude to be under the influence of divine inspiration. This most famous philosopher was born sometime between 600 and 590 B.C., and the length of his life has been estimated at nearly 100 years. The teachings of Pythagoras indicate that he was thoroughly conversant with the precepts of Oriental and Occidental esotericism. He traveled among the Jews and was instructed by the rabbins concerning the secret traditions of Moses, the lawgiver of Israel. Later, the school of the Essenes was conducted chiefly for the purpose of interpreting the Pythagorean symbols. Pythagoras was initiated into Egyptian, Babylonian, and Chaldean mystery schools. Although it is believed by some that he was a disciple of Zoroaster, it is doubtful whether his instructor of that name was the God-man now revered by the Parsees. While accounts of his travels differ, historians agree that he visited many countries and studied at the feet of many masters. After having acquired all which was possible for him to learn of the Greek philosophers, and presumably become an initiate in the Eleusinian mysteries, he went to Egypt, and after many rebuffs and refusals, finally succeeded in securing initiation in the mysteries of Isis at the hands of the priests of Thebes. Then this intrepid joiner wended his way into Phoenicia and Syria, where the mysteries of Adonis were conferred upon him, and crossing to the valley of the Euphrates, he tarried long enough to become versed in the secret lore of the Chaldeans, who still dwelt in the vicinity of Babylon. Finally, he made his greatest and most historic venture through Media and Persia into Hindustan, where he remained several years as a pupil and initiate of the learned Brahmins of Elephanta and Ellora. And that's from or see Ancient Freemasonry by Frank Hoggins. The same author adds that the name Pythagoras is still preserved in the records of the Brahmins as Yavankarya, the Ionian teacher. Pythagoras was said to have been the first man to call himself a philosopher. In fact, the world is indebted to him for the word philosopher. Before that time, the wise men had called themselves sages, which was interpreted to mean those who know. Pythagoras was more modest. He coined the word philosopher, which he defined as one who is attempting to find out. After returning from his wanderings, Pythagoras established a school, or as it has been sometimes called, a university, at Crotona, a Dorian colony in southern Italy. Upon his arrival at Crotona, he was regarded askance, but after a short time those holding important positions in the surrounding colonies sought his counsel in matters of great moment. He gathered around him a small group of sincere disciples whom he instructed in the secret wisdom which had been revealed to him, and also in the fundamentals of occult mathematics, music, and astronomy, which he considered to be the triangular foundation of all arts and sciences. When he was 60 years old, Pythagoras married one of his disciples, and 7 children resulted from the union. Now here we go. Let's pay attention to the numbers. His wife was a remarkably able woman who not only inspired him during the years of his life, but after his assassination continued to promulgate his doctrines. As is so often the case with genius, Pythagoras by his outspokenness incurred both political and personal enmity. Among those who came for initiation was one who, because Pythagoras refused to admit him, determined to destroy both the man and his philosophy. By means of false propaganda, this disgruntled one turned the minds of the common people against the philosopher. Without warning, a band of murderers descended upon the little group of buildings where the great teacher and his disciples dwelt, burned the structures, and killed Pythagoras. Accounts of the philosopher's death do not agree. Some say that he was murdered with his disciples, others that on escaping from Crotona with a small band of followers he was trapped and burned alive by his enemies in a little house where the band had decided to rest for the night. Another account states that, finding himself trapped in the burning structure, the disciples threw themselves into the flames, making of their own bodies a bridge over which Pythagoras escaped, only to die of a broken heart a short time afterwards as the result of grieving over the apparent fruitlessness of his efforts to serve and illuminate mankind. His surviving disciples attempted to perpetuate his doctrines, but they were persecuted on every hand, and very little remains today as a testimonial to the greatness of this philosopher. It is said that the disciples of Pythagoras never addressed him or referred to him by his own name, but always as the Master or that man. This may have been because of the fact that the name Pythagoras was believed to consist of a certain number of specially arranged letters with great sacred significance. The Word magazine has printed an article by T.R. Prater showing that Pythagoras initiated his candidates by means of a certain formula concealed within the letters of his own name. This may explain why the word Pythagoras was so highly revered. After the death of Pythagoras, his school gradually disintegrated, but those who had benefited by its teachings revered the memory of the great philosopher, as during his life they had reverenced the man himself. As time went on, Pythagoras came to be regarded as a god rather than a man, and his scattered disciples were bound together by their common admiration for the transcendent genius of their teacher. Edward Schur, in his Pythagoras and the Delphic Mysteries, relates the following incident as illustrative of the bond of fellowship uniting the members of the Pythagorean school. One of them, who had fallen upon sickness and poverty, was kindly taken in by an innkeeper. Before dying, he traced a few mysterious signs, the pentagram, no doubt, on the door of the inn, and said to the host, "Do not be uneasy. One of my brothers will pay my debts." A year afterwards, as a stranger was passing by this inn, he saw the signs and said to the host, "I am a Pythagorean. One of my brothers died here. Tell me what I owe you on his account." Frank Higgins, of the 32nd degree, gives an excellent compendium of the Pythagorean tenets in the following outline. Pythagoras' teachings are of the most transcendental importance to Masons, inasmuch as they are the necessary fruit of his contact with the leading philosophers of the whole civilized world of his own day, and must represent that in which all were agreed, shorn of all weeds of controversy. Thus the determined stand made by Pythagoras in defense of pure monotheism is sufficient evidence that the tradition to the effect that the unity of God was the supreme secret of all the ancient initiations is substantially correct. The philosophical school of Pythagoras was in a measure also a series of initiations, for he caused his pupils to pass through a series of degrees, and never permitted them personal contact with himself until they had reached the higher grades. According to his biographers, his degrees were 3 in number. The first, that of Mathematicus, assuring his pupils a proficiency in mathematics and geometry, which was then, as it would be now, if masonry were properly inculcated, the basis upon which all other knowledge was erected. Secondly, the degree of Theoreticus, which dealt with superficial applications of the exact sciences. And lastly, the degree of Electus, which entitled the candidate to pass forward into the light of the fullest illumination which he was capable of absorbing. The pupils of the Pythagorean school were divided into exoterici, or pupils in the outer grades, and esoterici, after they had passed the 3rd degree of initiation and were entitled to the secret wisdom. Silence, secrecy, and unconditional obedience were cardinal principles of this great order. The study of geometry, music, and astronomy was considered essential to a rational understanding of God, man, or nature, and no one would accompany Pythagoras as a disciple who was not thoroughly familiar with these sciences. Many came seeking admission to his school. Each applicant was tested on these 3 subjects, and if found ignorant, was summarily dismissed. Pythagoras was not an extremist. He taught moderation in all things rather than excess in anything, for he believed that an excess of virtue was in itself a vice. One of his favorite statements was, "We must avoid with our utmost endeavor and amputate with fire and sword, and by all other means from the body, sickness, from the soul, ignorance, from the belly, luxury, from a city, sedition, from a family, discord, and from all things, excess." Pythagoras also believed that there was no crime equal to that of anarchy. All men know what they want, but few know what they need. Pythagoras warned his disciples that when they prayed, they should not pray for themselves, that when they asked things of the gods, they should not ask for themselves, because no man knows what is good for him, and it is for this reason undesirable to ask for things which, if obtained, would only prove to be injurious. The god of Pythagoras was the monad, or the one that is everything. He described God as the supreme mind distributed throughout all parts of the universe, the cause of all things, the intelligence of all things, and the power within all things. He further declared the motion of God to be circular, the body of God to be composed of the substance of light, and the nature of God to be composed of the substance of truth. Pythagoras declared that the eating of meat clouded the reasoning faculties. While he did not condemn its use or totally abstain therefrom himself, he declared that judges should refrain from eating meat before a trial, in order that those who appeared before them might receive the most honest and astute decisions. When Pythagoras decided to retire into the temple of God for an extended period of time to meditate and pray, he took with him a supply of specially prepared food and drink. The food consisted of equal parts of the seeds of poppy and sesame, the skin of the sea onion, from which the juice had been thoroughly extracted, the flower of daffodil, the leaves of mallows, and a paste of barley and peas. These he compounded together with the addition of wild honey. For a beverage he took the seeds of cucumbers, dried raisins, the flowers of coriander, the seeds of mallows and purslane, scraped cheese, meal, and cream mixed together with sweetened and wild honey. Pythagoras claimed that this was the diet of Hercules while wandering in the Libyan desert, and was according to the formula given to that hero by the goddess Ceres herself. The favorite method of healing among the Pythagoreans was by the aid of poultices. These people also knew the magic properties of vast numbers of plants. Pythagoras highly esteemed the medicinal properties of the sea onion. and he is said to have written an entire volume on the subject. Such a work, however, is not known at the present time. Pythagoras discovered that music had greater therapeutic power, and he prepared special harmonies for various diseases. And a lot of these different harmonies you can actually find online now. They're on YouTube, and healing frequencies, all this different stuff, different frequencies supposedly emitted by the planets, which we'll get into that. He apparently experimented also with color, attaining considerable success. One of his unique curative processes resulted from his discovery of the healing value of certain verses from the Odyssey and the Iliad. These he caused to be read to persons suffering from certain ailments. He was opposed to surgery in all its forms and also objected to cauterizing. He would not permit the disfigurement of the human body, for such, in his estimation, was a sacrilege against the dwelling place of the gods. And you can see a lot of these teachings in modern-day religions as well. Pythagoras taught that friendship was the truest and nearest perfect of all relationships. He declared that in nature there was a friendship of all for all, of gods for men, of doctrines one for another, of the soul for the body, of the rational part for the irrational, of philosophy for its theory, of men for one another, of countrymen for one another, that friendship also existed between strangers, between a man and his wife, his children and his servants. All bonds without friendship were shackles, and there was no virtue in their maintenance. Pythagoras believed that relationships were essentially mental rather than physical, and that a stranger of sympathetic intellect was closer to him than a blood relation, whose viewpoint was at variance with his own. Pythagoras defined knowledge as the fruitage of mental accumulation. He believed that it would be obtained in many ways, but principally through observation. Wisdom was the understanding of the source or cause of all things, and this could be secured only by raising the intellect to a point where it intuitively cognized the invisible manifesting outwardly through the visible, and thus became capable of bringing itself in rapport with the spirit of things rather than with their forms. The ultimate source that wisdom could cognize was the monad, the mysterious permanent atom of the Pythagoreans. Pythagoras taught that both man and the universe were made in the image of God, that both being made in the same image, the understanding of one predicated the knowledge of the other. He further taught that there was a constant interplay between the grand man, the universe, and man, the little universe. And if you've ever seen any of Leonardo da Vinci's drawings of the man, you will see that it is set over a globe of stars. Interesting. Pythagoras believed that all the sidereal bodies were alive and that the forms of the planets and stars were merely bodies, encasing souls, minds, and spirits in the same manner that the visible human form is but the encasing vehicle for an invisible spiritual organism, which is, in reality, the conscious individual. Pythagoras regarded the planets as magnificent deities, worthy of the adoration and respect of man. All these deities, however, he considered subservient to the one first cause, within whom they all existed temporarily, as mortality exists in the midst of immortality. The famous Pythagorean Y signified the power of choice and was used in the mysteries as emblematic of the forking of the ways. The central stem separated into two parts, one branching to the right and the other to the left. The branch to the right was called divine wisdom, and the one to the left earthly wisdom. Youth, personified by the candidate walking the path of life, symbolized by the central stem of the Y, reaches the point where the path divides. The neophyte must then choose whether he will take the left-hand path and, following the dictates of his lower nature, enter upon a span of folly and thoughtlessness, which will inevitably result in his undoing, or whether he will take the right-hand road and, through integrity, industry, and sincerity, ultimately regain union with the immortals in the superior spheres. So here we have the classic mystery school belief that basically if you're smart enough and you're good enough, you can become God. And you also see that Pythagorean Y in the tree of life from the Kabbalah, which, it's the same ideas over and over. It is probable that Pythagoras obtained his concept of the Y from the Egyptians, who included in certain of their initiatory rituals a scene in which the candidate was confronted by two female figures. One of them, veiled with the white robes of the temple, urged the neophyte to enter into the halls of learning. The other, bedecked with jewels symbolizing earthly treasures and bearing in her hands a tray loaded with grapes, emblematic of false light, sought to lure him into the chambers of dissipation. This symbol is still preserved among the tarot cards, where it is called the forking of the ways. The forked stick has been the symbol of life among many nations, and it was placed in the desert to indicate the presence of water. Concerning the theory of transmigration as disseminated by Pythagoras, there are differences of opinion. According to one view, he taught that mortals who during their earthly existence had by their actions become like certain animals, returned to earth again in the form of the beasts which they had grown to resemble. Thus, a timid person would return in the form of a rabbit or a deer, a cruel person in the form of a wolf or other ferocious animal, and a cunning person in the guise of a fox. And I swear at some point in this show we're actually going to get to mystic numbers. This concept, however, does not fit into the general Pythagorean scheme, and it is far more likely that it was given in an allegorical rather than a literal sense. It was intended to convey the idea that human beings become bestial when they allow themselves to be dominated by their own lower desires and destructive tendencies. It is probable that the term transmigration is to be understood as what is more commonly called reincarnation, a doctrine which Pythagoras must have contacted directly or indirectly in India and Egypt. The fact that Pythagoras accepted the theory of successive reappearances of the spiritual nature in human form is found in a footnote in Eliphas Levi's History of Magic. He was an important champion of what used to be called the doctrine of metempsychosis, understood as the soul's transmigration into successive bodies. He himself had been Athalides, a son of Mercury, Euphorbus, son of Panthus, who perished at the hands of Menelaus in the Trojan War, Hermotimus, a prophet of Clazomenae, a city of Ionia, and a humble fisherman, and finally, the philosopher of Samos. Pythagoras also taught that each species of creatures had what he termed a seal, given it to by God, and that the physical form of each was the impression of this seal upon the wax of physical substance. Thus each body was stamped with the dignity of his divinely given pattern. Pythagoras believed that ultimately man would reach a state where he would cast off his gross nature and function in a body of spiritualized ether, which would be in juxtaposition to his physical form at all times, and which might be the eighth sphere, or antichthon. From this he would ascend into the realm of the immortals, where by divine birthright he belonged. Pythagoras taught that everything in nature was divisible into three parts, and that no one could become truly wise who did not view every problem as being diagrammatically triangular. So that's where you get the Pythagorean theorem for the triangle. He said, establish the triangle and the problem is 2/3 solved. Further, all things consist of three. In conformity with this viewpoint, Pythagoras divided the universe into three parts, which he called the supreme world, the superior world, and the inferior world. The highest, or supreme world, was a subtle, interpenetrative, spiritual essence, pervading all things, and therefore the true plane of the supreme deity itself, the deity being in every sense omnipresent, omniactive, omnipotent, and omniscient. Both of the lower worlds existed within the nature of this supreme sphere. The superior world was the home of the immortals. It was also the dwelling place of the archetypes, or the seals. Their natures in no manner partook of the material of earthiness, but they, casting their shadows upon the deep, or the inferior world, were cognizable only through their shadows. The third, or inferior world, was the home of those creatures who partook of material substance, or were engaged in labor with or upon material substance. Hence, the sphere was the home of the mortal gods, the demiurgi. We'll come up with that. We'll see that term many more times. The angels who labor with men, also the demons who partook of the nature of the earth, and finally mankind in the lower kingdoms, those temporarily of the earth but capable of rising above that sphere by reason and philosophy. The digits 1 and 2 are not considered numbers by the Pythagoreans, because they typify the two supermundane spheres. The Pythagorean numbers therefore begin with 3, the triangle, and 4, the square. These added to the 1 and 2 produce the 10, the great number of all things, the archetype of the universe. The three worlds were called receptacles. The first was a receptacle of principle, the second was a receptacle of intelligence, and the third, or lowest, was a receptacle of quantities. The symmetrical solids were regarded by Pythagoras and by the Greek thinkers after him as of the greatest importance. To be perfectly symmetrical or regular, a solid must have an equal number of faces meeting at each of its angles, and these faces must be equal regular polygons, figures whose sides and angles are all equal. Pythagoras, perhaps, may be credited with the great discovery that there are only 5 such solids. And here you're seeing the classic, worship of perfection, basically. And that is still very prevalent today. Now the Greeks believed the world, the material universe, to be composed of 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. And to the Greek mind the conclusion was inevitable that the shapes of the particles of the elements were those of the regular solids. Earth particles, or rocks, were cubical, the cube being the regular solid possessed of greatest stability. Fire particles were tetrahedral, the tetrahedron being the simplest and hence lightest solid. Water particles were icosahedral for exactly the reverse reason, whilst air particles, as intermediate between the two latter, were octahedral. The dodecahedron was, to those ancient mathematicians, the most mysterious of the solids. It was by far the most difficult to construct, the accurate drawing of the regular pentagon necessitating a rather elaborate application of Pythagoras' great theorem. Hence the conclusion, as Plato put it, that this, the regular dodecahedron, the deity employed in tracing the plan of the universe. Mr. Redgrove has not mentioned the 5th element of the ancient mysteries, that which would make the analogy between the symmetrical solids and the elements complete. The 5th element, or ether, was called by the Hindus akasa. It was closely correlated with the hypothetical ether of modern science and was closely correlated with the and was the interpretative substance permeating all of the other elements and acting as a common solvent and common denominator of them. The 12-faced solid also subtly referred to the 12 immortals who surface the universe, and also to the 12 convolutions of the human brain, the vehicles of those immortals in the nature of man. While Pythagoras, in accordance with others of his day, practiced divination, possibly arithmomancy, which would be modern-day numerology, there is no accurate information concerning the methods which he used. He is believed to have had a remarkable wheel by means of which he could predict future events, and to have learned hydromancy from the Egyptians, which would be the foretelling of future events from water. He believed that brass had oracular powers, because even when everything was perfectly still, there was always a rumbling sound in brass bowls. He once addressed a prayer to the spirit of a river, and out of the water arose a voice, "Pythagoras, I greet thee." It is claimed for him that he was able to cause demons to enter into water and disturb its surface, and by means of the agitation certain things were predicted. After having drunk from a certain spring one day, one of the masters of Pythagoras announced that the spirit of the water had just predicted that a great earthquake would occur the next day, a prophecy which was fulfilled. It is highly probable that Pythagoras possessed hypnotic power, not only over man but also over animals. He caused a bird to change the course of its flight, a bear to cease its ravages upon a community, and a bull to change its diet by the exercise of mental influence. He was also gifted with second sight, being able to see things at a distance and accurately describe incidents that had not yet come to pass. And we're going to skip a little bit further ahead here into the Pythagorean mathematics. This is still out of the same book. Concerning the secret significance of numbers, there has been much speculation. Though many interesting discoveries have been made, it may be safely said that with the death of Pythagoras, the great key to his science was lost. For nearly 2,500 years, philosophers of all nations have attempted to unravel the Pythagorean skin, but apparently none has been successful. Notwithstanding attempts made to obliterate all records of the teachings of Pythagoras, fragments have survived which give clues to some of his simpler parts of his philosophy. The major secrets were never committed to writing, but were communicated orally to a few chosen disciples. These apparently dared not divulge their secrets to the profane. Remember the concept of the sacred and the profane. We'll see that over and over again. The result being that when death sealed their lips, the arcana died with them. Certain of the secret schools in the world today are perpetuations of the ancient mysteries, and although it is quite possible that they may possess some of the original numerical formula, there is no evidence of it in the voluminous writings which have issued from these groups during the last 500 years. These writings, while frequently discussing Pythagoras, show no indication of a more complete knowledge of his intricate doctrines than the post-Pythagorean Greek speculators had, who talked much, wrote little, knew less, and concealed their ignorance under a series of mysterious hints and promises. Here and there among the literary products of early writers are found enigmatic statements which they made no effort to interpret. The following example is quoted from Plutarch. The Pythagoreans indeed go farther than this, and honor even numbers and geometrical diagrams with the names and titles of the gods. Thus they call the equilateral triangle head born Minerva and Tritogenia, because it may be equally divided by 3 perpendiculars drawn from each of the angles. So the unit they term Apollo, as to the number 2, they have affixed the name of strife and audaciousness, and to that of 3, justice. For as doing an injury is an extreme on the one side, and the suffering one is an extreme on the other, justice properly takes place in the middle between them. In like manner, the number 36, the tetractys, which we'll get into in a little while, or sacred quaternion, being composed of the first 4 odd numbers added to the first 4 even ones, as commonly reported, is looked upon by them as the most solemn oath they can take, and called kosmos. Earlier in the same work, Plutarch also notes, for the power of the triangle is expressive of the nature of Pluto, Bacchus, and Mars, and the properties of the square, Venus, Ceres, Vesta, and Juno, of the dodecahedron of Jupiter, so as we are informed by Eudoxus, is the figure of 56 angles, expressive of the nature of Typhon, which, if you've been listening to the shows before, you should know who these people are. Plutarch did not pretend to explain the inner significance of the symbols, but believed that the relationship with Pythagoras established between the geometrical solids and gods was the result of images the great sage had seen in the Egyptian temples. It always goes back to Egypt. Albert Pike, the great Masonic symbolist, admitted that there were many points concerning which he could secure no reliable information. In his Symbolism, for the 32nd and 33rd degree, he wrote, I do not understand why the 7 should be called Minerva or the cube Neptune. Undoubtedly, the names given by the Pythagoreans to the different numbers were themselves enigmatical and symbolic, and there is little doubt that in the time of Plutarch the meanings these names concealed were lost. Pythagoras had succeeded too well in concealing his symbols with a veil that was from the first impenetrable without his oral explanation. Okay, this uncertainty shared by all true students of the subject proves conclusively that it is unwise to make definite statements founded on the indefinite and fragmentary information available concerning the Pythagorean system of mathematical philosophy. The material which follows represents an effort to collect a few salient points from the scattered records preserved by disciples of Pythagoras and others who have since contacted his philosophy. The first step in obtaining the numerical value of a word is to resolve it back into its original tongue. And this is why when you do this, which is called gematria, which I'm sure it'll go into that. This is why when a lot of people try to do this with modern day words, it really doesn't turn out anything neat or cool. It's because the language, English language, and the older languages are all based on different things, and they actually work they're in different orders as well, so the value changes. Only words of Greek or Hebrew derivation can be successfully analyzed by this method, and all words must be spelled in their most ancient and complete forms. Old Testament words and names therefore must be translated back into the early Hebrew characters, and New Testament words into the Greek. Two examples will help to clarify this principle. The demiurgus of the Jews is called in English Jehovah, but when seeking the numerical value of the name Jehovah, it is necessary to resolve the name into its Hebrew letters. It becomes Yod-Hed Vod-Hed, and is read from right to left. The Hebrew letters are Yod, He, Vav, He. And when reversed into the English order from left to right, we read Yod, He, Vav, He. By consulting the foregoing table of letter values, it is found that the 4 letters of the sacred name have the following numerical significance. Yod equals 10, He equals 5, Va equals 6, and the second He equals 5. So we have 10, 5, 6, 5. And that YHVH in the Indian tongue is IOWA, or Iowa. If the English letters were used, the answer obviously would not be correct. The second example is the mysterious Gnostic pantheos Abraxas, which is where we get abracadabra. For this name, the Greek table is used. Abraxas in Greek is A equals 1, B equals 2, whatever that letter is, like it's phi, what equals 100, alpha equals 1. I believe that's epsilon equals 60, alpha equals 1, and I'm not sure what that one equals 200. The sum being 365, the number of days in the year. This number furnishes the key to the mystery of Abraxas. He was symbolic of the 365 aeons, or spirit of the days, gathered together in one composite personality. Abraxas is symbolic of 5 creatures, and as the circle of the year actually consists of 360 degrees, each of the emanating deities is 1/5 of this power, or 72, which we'll get into that later. One of the most sacred numbers in the Old Testament of the Jews and in their Kabbalistic system. This same method is used in finding the numerical value of the names of the gods and goddesses of the Greeks and Jews. And I'd also like to go back and say, for the 365, you'll see that everywhere. Enoch, Book of Enoch, he lived for 365 years. I don't know, I can't think of any more right now, but they'll come up. All higher numbers can be reduced to 1 of the original 10 numerals, and the 10 itself to 1. Therefore, all groups of numbers resulting from the translation of names of deities into their numerical equivalents have a basis in one of the first 10 numbers. By this system, in which the digits are added together, 666 becomes 18, and thus in turn becomes 1 plus 8, or 9. According to Revelation, 144,000 are to be saved. This number becomes 1 plus 4 plus 4 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0, which equals 9, thus proving that both the beast of Babylon and the number of the saved refer to man himself, whose symbol is the number 9. This system can be used successfully with both Greek and Hebrew letter values. The original Pythagorean system of numerical philosophy contains nothing to justify the practice now in vogue of changing the given name or surname in the hope of improving the temperament or financial condition by altering the name vibrations. Which that's the same principle when Aleister Crowley changed his name, that he would gain fame and fortune based on the rhythm and the numerical value of his name and the consonants. There is also a system of calculation in vogue for the English language, but its accuracy is a matter of legitimate dispute. It is comparatively modern and has no relationship either to the Hebrew Kabbalistic system or to the Greek procedure. The claim made by some that it is Pythagorean is not supported by any tangible evidence, and there are many reasons why such a contention is unintelligible. The fact that Pythagoras used 10 as the basis of calculation, while this system uses 9, an imperfect number, and is in itself almost conclusive. Furthermore, the arrangement of the Greek and Hebrew letters does not agree closely enough with the English to permit the application of the number sequences of one language to the number sequences of the others. Further experimentation with the system may prove profitable, but it is without basis in antiquity. The arrangement of the letters and numbers is as follows. Basically how this works out is you line up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 on top, and under those headings you write A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but you base them all under the letter of 9. And so if you're, yeah, you get it. The letters under each of the numbers have the value of the figure at the top of the column. Thus in the word man, M equals 4, A equals 1, N equals 5, a total of 10. The values of the numbers are practically the same as those given by the Pythagorean system. But yeah, if we would take that back even farther, you would see that MAN, again, would add up to 9. The Pythagoreans declared arithmetic to be the mother of the mathematical sciences. This is proved by the fact that geometry, music, and astronomy are dependent upon, but it is not dependent upon them. Thus geometry may be removed, but arithmetic will remain. But if arithmetic be removed, geometry is eliminated. In the same manner, music depends upon arithmetic, but the elimination of music affects arithmetic only by limiting one of its expressions. The Pythagoreans also demonstrated arithmetic to be prior to astronomy, for the latter is dependent upon both geometry and music. The size, form, and motion of the celestial bodies is determined by the use of geometry, their harmony and rhythm by the use of music. If astronomy be removed, neither geometry nor music is injured, but if geometry and music be eliminated, astronomy is destroyed. The priority of both geometry and music to astronomy is therefore established. Arithmetic, however, is prior to all. It is primary and fundamental. Pythagoras instructed his disciples that the science of mathematics is divided into two major parts. The first is concerned with the multitude, or the constitutes part of a thing, and the second with a magnitude, or the relative size or density of a thing. Magnitude is divided into two parts. Magnitude, which is stationary, and magnitude, which is movable, the stationary part having priority. Multitude is also divided into two parts, for it is related both to itself and to other things, the first relationship having priority. Pythagoras assigned the science of arithmetic to multitude related to itself, and the art of music to multitude related to other things. Geometry likewise was assigned to stationary magnitude, and spherics, used partly in the sense of astronomy, to movable magnitude. Both multitude and magnitude were circumscribed by the circumference of mind. The atomic theory has proved size to be the result of number, for a mass is made up of minute units, though mistaken by the uninformed for a single simple substance. So here, Pythagoras were already talking about the atom, as modern science would deem, if not the smallest, one of the smallest particles. But yeah, it was already being talked about, way back in this time. Owing to the fragmentary condition of existing Pythagorean records, it is difficult to arrive at exact definition of terms. Before it is possible, however, to unfold the subject further, some light must be cast upon the meanings of the words number, monad, and one. The monad signifies the all-including one. The Pythagoreans called the monad the noble number, sire of gods and men. The monad also signifies the sum of any combination of numbers considered as a whole. Thus, the universe is considered as a monad, but the individual parts of the universe, such as the planets and elements, are monads in relation to the parts of which they themselves are composed, though they, in turn, are parts of the greater monad formed of their sum. The monad may also be likened to the seed of a tree, which, when it has grown, has many branches. In other words, the numbers are to the monad what the branches of the tree are to the seed of the tree. From the study of the mysterious Pythagorean monad, Leibniz evolved his magnificent theory of the world of atoms, a theory in perfect accord with the ancient teachings of the mysteries, for Leibniz himself was an initiate of a secret school. So here we have Pythagoras Mystery School talking about the world of atoms. Leibniz invents the theory of atoms, while he himself is also an initiate of the Mystery School. By some Pythagoreans, the monad is also considered synonymous with one. Number is the term applied to all numerals and their combinations. Pythagoras defines number to be the extension and energy of the spermatic seasons contained in the monad. The followers of Hippasus declared number to be the first pattern used by the demiurgus, or the god that created the physical universe, in the formation of the universe. The one was defined by the Platonists as the summit of the many. The one differs from the monad in that the term monad is used to designate the sum of the parts considered as a unit, whereas the one is the term applied to each of its integral parts. There are two orders of number, odd and even. Because unity, or one, always remains indivisible, the odd number cannot be divided equally. Thus, 9 is 4 plus 1 plus 4, the unity in the center being indivisible. Furthermore, if any odd number be divided into two parts, one part will always be odd and the other even. Thus 9 may be 5 plus 4, 3 plus 6, 7 plus 2, or 8 plus 1. The Pythagoreans considered the odd number, of which the monad was the prototype, to be definite and masculine. They were not all agreed, however, as to the nature of unity or one. Some declared it to be positive because if added to an even number, it produces an odd number. Others demonstrated that if unity be added to an odd number, the latter becomes even, thereby making the masculine feminine. Unity, or one, therefore, was considered an androgynous number, partaking of both the masculine and the feminine attributes, consequently both odd and even. For this reason, the Pythagoreans called it evenly odd. It was customary for the Pythagoreans to offer sacrifices of an uneven number of objects to the superior gods, while to the goddesses and subterranean spirits or elementals an even number was offered. Any even number may be divided into two equal parts, which are always either both odd or both even. Thus 10 by equal division gives 5 plus 5, both odd numbers. The same principle holds true if the 10 be unequally divided. For example, in 6 plus 4, both parts are even. In 7 plus 3, both parts are odd. In 8 plus 2, both parts are again even. And in 9 plus 1, both parts are again odd. I know this is probably a lot to take in, but I think if you listen a couple times and actually write this stuff down, it'll make a lot more sense to you, because I'm no mathematician, and yeah, it's pretty hard for me to grasp, but eventually you'll catch on, or at least sense the pattern. However it may be divided, the parts will always be both odd or both even. The Pythagoreans considered the even number, of which the duad was the prototype, to be indefinite and feminine. The odd numbers are divided by a mathematical contrivance called the sieve of Eratosthenes into three general classes: incomposite, composite, and incomposite composite. The incomposite numbers are those which have no divisor other than themselves and unity, which is 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23, 29, 31, 37, 41, 43, 47, and so forth. For example, 7 is divisible only by 7, which goes into itself once, and unity, which goes into it 7 times. The composite numbers are those which are divisible not only by themselves and unity, but also by some other number, such as 9, 15, 21, 25, 27, 33, 39, 45, 51, 57, and so forth. For example, 21 is divisible not only by itself and by unity, but also by 3 and by 7. The incomposite composite numbers are those which have no common divisor, although each of itself is capable of division, such as 9 and 25. For example, 9 is divisible by 3 and 25 by 5, but neither is divisible by the divisor or for the other. Thus they have no common divisor. Because they have individual divisors, they are called composite, and because they have no common divisor, they are called incomposite. Accordingly, the term incomposite composite was created to describe their properties. Even numbers are divided into 3 classes: evenly even, evenly odd, and oddly odd. The evenly even numbers are all in duple ratio from unity. Thus, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, and 1024, the proof of the perfect evenly even number is that it can be halved, and the halves again halved back to unity, as half of 64 equals 32, half of 32 equals 16, half of 16 equals 8, half of 8 equals 4, half of 4 equals 2, half of 2 equals 1. Beyond unity, it is impossible to go. The evenly even numbers possess certain unique properties. The sum of any number of terms but the last term is always equal to the last term minus 1. For example, the sum of the first and second terms, 1 plus 2, equals the third term, 4 minus 1, or the sum of the first, second, third, and fourth terms, 1 plus 2 plus 4 plus 8 equals the fifth term, 16 minus 1. In a series of evenly even numbers, the first multiplied by the last equals the last. The second multiplied by the second from the last equals the last, and so on until in an odd series one number remains, which multiplied by itself equals the last number of the series. Or in an even series, two numbers remain, which multiplied by each other give the last number of the series. For example, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16 is an odd series. The first number multiplied by the last number, 16, equals the last number, 16. The second number, 2, multiplied by the second from the last number, 8, equals the last number, 16. Being an odd series, the 4 is left in the center, and this multiplied by itself also equals the last number, 16. Evenly odd numbers are those which, when halved, are incapable of further division by halving. They are formed by taking the odd numbers in sequential order and multiplying them by 2. By this process, the odd numbers 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11 produce the evenly odd numbers 2, 6, 10, 14, 18, 22. Thus, every fourth number is evenly odd. Each of the even-odd numbers may be divided once as 2, which becomes 2 ones and cannot be divided further, or 6, which becomes 2 threes and cannot be divided further. Another peculiarity of the evenly odd numbers is that if the divisor be odd, the quotient is always even, and if the divisor be even, the quotient is always odd. For example, if 18 be divided by 2, an even divisor, the quotient is 9, an odd number. If 18 be divided by 3, the quotient is 6, an even number. The evenly odd numbers are also remarkable in that each term is 1/2 of the sum of the terms on either side of it. For example, hold on. 10 is 1/2 of the sum of 6 and 14. 18 is 1/2 the sum of 14 and 22. And 6 is 1/2 the sum of 2 and 10. The oddly odd, or unevenly even, numbers are a compromise between the evenly even and the evenly odd. Unlike the evenly even, they cannot be halved back to unity. And unlike the evenly odd, they are capable of more than one division by halving. The oddly odd numbers are formed by multiplying the evenly even numbers above 2 by the odd numbers above 1. The odd numbers above 1 are 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and so forth. The evenly even numbers above 2 are 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and so on. The first odd number of the series, multiplied by 4, gives 12, the first oddly odd number. By multiplying 5, 7, 9, 11, and so forth by 4, oddly odd numbers are formed. The other oddly odd numbers are produced by multiplying 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and so forth, in turn, by the other evenly even numbers, 8, 16, 32, 64, and so on. An example of the halving of the oddly odd number is as follows. Half of 12 is 6, half of 6 is 3, which cannot be halved further, because the Pythagoreans did not divide unity. Even numbers, so yeah, we got the 1, yeah, you can definitely start to see The one world belief system, New World Order, one world government, all over this stuff. Even numbers are also divided into three other classes: superperfect, deficient, and perfect. Superperfect or superabundant numbers are such as have the sum of their fractional parts greater than themselves. For example, half of 24 equals 12, a quarter equals 6, a third equals 8, a sixth equals 4, a 12th equals 2, and 1/24 equals 1. The sum of these parts, 12 plus 6 plus 8 plus 4 plus 2 plus 1, is 33, which is in excess of 24, the original number. And we'll get into 33 a little bit later. Deficient numbers are such as have the sum of their fractional parts less than themselves. For example, half of 14 equals 7, 1/7 equals 2, and 1/14 equals 1. The sum of these parts, 7 plus 2 plus 1, is 10, which is less than 14, the original number. Perfect numbers are such as have the sum of their fractional parts equal to themselves. For example, 1/2 of 28 equals 14, a fourth equals 7, 1/7 equals 4, and 1/14 equals 2, and 1/28 equals 1. The sum of these parts is equal to 28. The perfect numbers are extremely rare. There is only one between 1 and 10, namely 6, one between 10 and 100, namely 28, one between 100 and 1,000, namely 496, and one between 1,000 and 10,000, namely 8,128. The perfect numbers are bound by the official or by the following rule. The first number of the evenly even series of numbers is added to the second number of the series, and if an incomposite number results, it is multiplied by the last number of the series of evenly even numbers whose sum produced it. The product is the first perfect number. For example, the first and second evenly even numbers are 1 and 2. Their sum is 3, an incomposite number. If 3 be multiplied by 2, the last number of the series of evenly even numbers used to produce it, the product is 6, the first perfect number. If the addition of the evenly even numbers does not result in an incomposite number, the next evenly even number of the series must be added until an incomposite number results. The second perfect number is found in the following manner. The sum of the evenly even numbers 1, 2, and 4 is 7, an incomposite number. If 7 be multiplied by 4, the last of the series of evenly even numbers used to produce it, the product is 28, the second perfect number. This method of calculation may be continued to infinity. Perfect numbers, when multiplied by 2, produce superabundant numbers, and when divided by 2, produce deficient numbers. The Pythagoreans evolved their philosophy from the science of numbers. The following quotation from Theoretic Arithmetic is an excellent example of the practice. Perfect numbers, therefore, are beautiful images of the virtues which are certain media between excess and defect, and are not summits as by some of the ancients they were supposed to be. And evil indeed is opposed to evil, but both are opposed to one good. However, good is never opposed to good, but to two evils at one and at the same time. This timidity is opposed to audacity, to both of which the want of true courage is common. But both timidity and audacity are opposed to fortitude. Craft also is opposed to fatuity, to both of which the want of intellect is common, and both those are opposed to prudence. Thus, too, profusion is opposed to avarice, to both of which illiberality is common, and both these are opposed to liberality. And in a similar manner in the other virtues, by which it is evident that perfect numbers have a great similitude to the virtues, but they also resemble the virtues on another account, for they are rarely found as being few, and they are generated in a very constant order. On the contrary, an infinite multitude of superabundant and diminished numbers may be found, nor are they disposed in any orderly series, nor generated from any certain end, and hence they have a great similitude to the vices, which are numerous, inordinate, and indefinite. Alright. The following outline of the Pythagorean numbers is a paraphrase of the writings of Nicomachus, Theon of Smyrna, Proclus, Porphyry, Plutarch, Clement of Alexandria, Aristotle, and other early authorities. The monad, 1, is so called because it remains always in the same condition, that is, separate from multitude. Its attributes are as follows. It is called mind, because the mind is stable and has preeminence. Hermaphrodism, because it is both male and female. Odd and even, for being added to the even it makes odd, and to the odd even. God, because it is the beginning and end of all, but itself has neither beginning nor end. Good, for such is the nature of God, the receptacle of matter, because it produces the duad, which is essentially material. And it is very interesting that the one does look like a phallic symbol, which would fall in place with the teaching of the mysteries, because it is the generative force. By the Pythagoreans, monad was called chaos, obscurity, chasm, Tartarus, Styx, Lethe, Atlas, Axis, Morpho, or a name for Venus, and tower or throne of Jupiter, because of the great powers which abide in the center of the universe and controls the circular motion of the planets about itself. Monad is also called germinal reason, because it is the origin of all the thoughts in the universe. Other names given to it were Apollo, because of its relation to the sun, Prometheus, because he brought man light. Pay attention to Prometheus. Paralios, one who exists in fire. Geniture, because without it no number can exist. Substance, because substance is primary. Cause of truth, and constitution of symphony. All these, because it is the primordial one. Between greater and lesser, the monad is equal. Between intention and remission, it is middle. In multitude, it is mean. And in time, it is now, because eternity knows neither past nor future. It is called Jupiter, because he is father and head of the gods. And we'll get into that whole ordeal at a later time. Jupiter and Saturn and all that good stuff. Vesta, the fire of the home, because it is located in the midst of the universe and remains there, inclining to no side as a dot in a circle. Form, because it is circumscribes, comprehends, and terminates. Love, concord, and piety, because it is indivisible. Other symbolic names for the monad are ship, chariot, Proteus, Mnemosyne, and polyonymous, which means having many names. The following symbolic names were given to the duad. 2, because it has been divided and is 2 rather than 1. And when there are 2, each is opposed to the other. Genius, evil, darkness, inequality, instability, movability, boldness, fortitude, contention, matter, dissimilarity, partition between multitude and monad, defect, shapelessness, indefiniteness, indeterminateness, harmony, tolerance, root, feet of fountain, abounding idea, top, phanes, opinion, fallacy, alterity, diffidence, impulse, death, motion, generation, mutation, division, longitude, augmentation, composition, communion, misfortune, sustentation, imposition, marriage, soul, and science. In his book Numbers, W. Wynne Westcott says of the duad, it was called audacity, from its being the earliest number to separate itself from the divine one, from the adytum of God-nourished silence, as the Chaldean oracles say. As the monad is the father, so the duad is the mother. Therefore, the duad has certain points in common with the goddess Isis, Re, Jove's mother, Phrygia, Lydia, Dindymene, or Sibyl, Ceres, Erato, which is one of the muses, Diana, because the moon is forked, Dictina, Venus, Dione, Cytherea, Juno, because she is both wife and sister of Jupiter, and Maya, the mother of Mercury. While the monad is the symbol of wisdom, the duad is the symbol of ignorance. for in it exists the sense of separateness, which sense is the beginning of ignorance. The duad, however, is also the mother of wisdom, for ignorance, out of the nature of itself, invariably gives birth to wisdom. The Pythagoreans revered the monad but despised the duad, because it was the symbol of polarity. By the power of the duad, the deep was created in contradistinction to the heavens. The deep mirrored the heavens and became the symbol of illusion, for the below was merely a reflection of the above. The below was called Maya, the illusion, the sea, the great void, and to symbolize it, the Magi of Persia carried mirrors. From the duad arose disputes and contentions until, by bringing the monad between the duad, equilibrium was re-established by the Savior God, who took upon himself the form of a number and was crucified between two thieves for the sins of men. The triad, 3, is the first number actually odd, monad not always being considered a number. It is the first equilibrium of unities. Therefore, Pythagoras said that Apollo gave oracles from a tripod and advised offer of libation 3 times. The key words to the qualities of the triad are friendship, peace, existence, prudence, piety, temperance, and virtue. The following deities partake of the principles of the triad. Saturn, the ruler of time, which we'll do a whole show on Saturn. Latona, Cornucopia, Ophion, the great serpent, Thetis, Hecate, Polyhymnia, which is another muse, Pluto, who is the god of the underworld, Triton, president of the sea, Tritogenia, Achelous, the Fates, Furies, and Graces. And you'll see the triple god, the Trinity, the triple goddess everywhere throughout history. This number is called wisdom because men organize the present, foresee the future, and benefit by the experiences of the past. It is cause of wisdom and understanding. The triad is the number of knowledge, music, geometry, and astronomy, and the science of the celestials and terrestrials. Pythagoras taught that the cube of this number had the power of the lunar circle. The sacredness of the triad and its symbol, the triangle, is derived from the fact that it is made up of the monad and the duad. The monad is the symbol of the Divine Father, the duad of the Great Mother. The triad, being made of these two, is therefore androgynous and is symbolic of the fact that God gave birth to his worlds out of himself, who, in his creative aspect, is always symbolized by the triangle. And you'll see that in modern-day art, definitely in Catholic art, where most of the saints and gods will have the halo behind their head, but when it's respective of God the Father, you'll see a triangle behind his head. The monad, passing into the duad, was thus incapable of becoming the parent of progeny, for the duad was the womb of Meru, within which the world was incubated and within which still exists an embryo. And you'll see that in symbology. We'll have the obelisk or the phallic symbol, or 1, and it'll be placed in 2 conjoining circles, which is called the Vesica Pisces, where you have the 1 and the 2, and it makes the 3. The tetrad, 4, was esteemed by the Pythagoreans as the primogenial number, the root of all things, the fountain of nature, and the most perfect number. All tetrads are intellectual. They have an emergent order and encircle the world as the Empyrean passes through it. Why the Pythagoreans expressed God as a tetrad is explained in a sacred discourse ascribed to Pythagoras, wherein God is called the number of numbers. This is because the decad, or 10, is composed of 1, 2, 3, and 4. The number 4 is symbolic of God because it is symbolic of the first 4 numbers. Moreover, the tetrad is the center of the week, being halfway between 1 and 7. The tetrad is also the first geometric solid. Pythagoras explained or maintained that the soul of man consists of a tetrad, the 4 powers of the soul being mind, science, opinion, and sense. The tetrad connects all beings, elements, numbers, and seasons. Nor can anything be named which does not depend upon the tetractys. It is the cause and maker of all things, the intelligible God, author of celestial and sensible good. Plutarch interprets this tetractys, which he said was also called the world, to be 36, consisting of the first 4 odd numbers added to the first 4 even numbers, thus 1 plus 3 plus 5 plus 7 equals 16, over 2 plus 4 plus 6 plus 8 equals 20, and then that together is 36. Keywords given to the tetrad are impetuosity, strength, virility, two-mothered, and the key keeper of nature, because the universal constitution cannot be without it. It is called harmony and the first profundity. The following deities partook of the nature of the tetrad: Hercules, Mercury, Vulcan, Bacchus, and Urania. The triad represents the primary colors and the major planets, while the tetrad represents the secondary colors and the minor planets. From the first triangle come forth the 7 points, symbolized by a triangle and a square. These together form the Masonic apron. The pentad, 5, is the union of an odd and an even number. Among the Greeks, the pentagram was a sacred symbol of light, health, and vitality. It is also symbolized the 5th element, ether, because it is free from the disturbances of the 4 lower elements. It is called equilibrium because it divides the perfect number 10 into 2 equal parts. The pentad is symbolic of nature, for when multiplied by itself, it returns into itself, just as grains of wheat, starting in the form of seed, pass through nature's processes and reproduce the seed of the wheat as the ultimate form of their own growth. Other numbers multiplied by themselves produce other numbers. But only 5 and 6 multiplied by themselves produce their numbers, but only 5 and 6 multiplied by themselves represent and retain their original number as the last figure in their products. The pentad represents all the superior and inferior beings. It is sometimes referred to as the Hierophant, or the priests of the mysteries, because of its connection with the spiritual ethers, by means of which mystic development is attained. And again, I say go back to the tarot card show, and you'll see all this laid out pretty plainly. Keywords of the pentad are reconciliation, alternation, marriage, immortality, cordiality, providence, and sound. Among the deities who partook of the nature of the pentad were Pallas, Nemesis, Bubastia, Venus, Androgena, Cytherea, and the messengers of Jupiter. The tetrad, the elements, plus the monad, equals the pentad. The Pythagoreans taught that the elements of earth, fire, air, and water were permeated by a substance called ether, the basis of vitality and life. Therefore, they chose the 5-pointed star, or pentagram, as the symbol of vitality, health, and interpenetration. It was customary for the philosophers to conceal the element of earth under the symbol of a dragon, and many of the heroes of antiquity were told to go forth and slay the dragon. Hence they drove their sword, the monad, or one, into the body of the dragon, or the tetrad. This resulted in the formation of the pentad, a symbol of victory of the spiritual nature over the material nature. The 4 elements are symbolized in the early biblical writings as the 4 rivers that poured out of the Garden of Eden. The elements themselves are under the control of the composite cherubim of Ezekiel, which you'll have to get into that, which a lot of modern-day people would think this is talking, or the cherubim of Ezekiel was actually a flying saucer. Perhaps, but it makes a little bit more sense. The Pythagoreans held the hexad, the 6, to represent, as Clement of Alexandria conceived, the creation of the world according to both the prophets and the ancient mysteries. It was called by the Pythagoreans the perfection of all the parts. This number was particularly sacred to Orpheus, and also to the Fate, Lachesis, and the Muse Thalia. It was called the form of forms, the articulation of the universe, and the maker of the soul. Among the Greeks, harmony and the soul were considered to be similar in nature because all souls are harmonic. The hexad is also the symbol of marriage because it is performed by the union of 2 triangles, one masculine and one feminine. So you're going to get the Star of David here, which that symbol you can take, level to level to level of what it really means, what it was intended to mean, where it came from, all that. Among the keywords given to the hexad are time. Here's an interesting note. Remember, Saturn, who is the god of time, is represented by the hexagon or the hexad, and you'll find that if you take a picture of the planet Saturn, on top of it there is a strangely defined hexagram on top of it. Weird. For it is the measure of duration, panacea, because health is equilibrium, and the hexad is a balanced number. The world, because the world, like the hexad, is often seen to consist of contraries by harmony. Omnisufficient, because its parts are sufficient for totality. Unwearied, because it contains the elements of immortality. The heptad, 7, was called worthy of veneration. It was held to be the number of religion, because man is controlled by 7 celestial spirits to whom it is proper for him to make offerings. And you'll also see... Now, let me go on, maybe it'll talk about it. It was called the number of life because it was believed that human creatures born in the 7th month of embryonic life usually lived, but those born in the 8th month often died. One author called it the motherless virgin, Minerva, because it was not born of a mother but out of the crown, or the head of the father, the monad. I should probably get into this right now. You'll see a lot of symbology. The Elohim of the Bible were always described in 7 and number, and you'll see, like on the Statue of Liberty, she's wearing the crown, which is a solar symbol, which always will have 7 rays emanating from the crown. And here we see, like I'll go back, it says, because man is controlled by 7 celestial spirits, and supposedly they are coming from the sun. Because it was... Okay, back to the book. One author called it the motherless virgin, Minerva, because it was not born of a mother, but out of the crown, or the head of the father, the monad. Keywords of the heptad are fortune, occasion, custody, control, government, judgment, dreams, voices, sounds, and that which leads all things to their end. Deities whose attributes were expressed by the heptad were Aegis, Osiris, Mars, and Cleo, and you'll know some of this should sound familiar from the last show of the Osirian cycle. Another thing interesting to note is that when you shine the light from the sun through a prism, it breaks down into 7 colors. Among many ancient nations, the heptad is a sacred number. Well, here we go, like I said. The Elohim of the Jews were supposedly 7 in number. They were the spirits of the dawn, more commonly known as the archangels, controlling the planets. And remember, back in these days, they believed there were 7 planets, not whatever we have today. The 7 archangels, with the 3 spirits controlling the sun in its threefold aspect, constitute the 10, the sacred Pythagorean decad. The mysterious Pythagorean tetractys, or 4 rows of dots increasing from 1 to 4, which forms into like a triangle, was symbolic of the stages of creation. The great Pythagorean truth that all things in nature are regenerated through the decad, or the 10, is subtly preserved in Freemasonry through the grips. These grips being effected by the uniting of 10 fingers, 5 on the hand of each person. The 3, spirit, mind, and soul, descend into the 4, the world, the sum being 7, or the mystic nature of man, consisting of a 3-fold spiritual body and a 4-fold material form. These are symbolized by the cube, which has 6 surfaces and a mysterious 7th point within. The 6 surfaces are the directions: north, east, south, west, up and down, or front, back, right, left, above, and below. Or again, earth, fire, air, water, spirit, and matter. In the midst of these stands the One, which is the upright figure of man, from whose center in the cube radiate 6 pyramids. From this comes the great occult axiom: the center is the father of the directions, the dimensions, and the distances. And when you get farther into that, we get farther into the cube, you'll notice that the perfect proportioned cube, its measurements are 666, which, as the Bible says, is the number of a man. Anyways, the heptad is the number of the law, because it is the number of the makers of cosmic law, the 7 spirits before the throne. The ogdoad, 8, was sacred because it was the number of the first cube, which form had 8 corners, and was the only evenly even number under 10. Thus the 8 is divided into 2 4s, each 4 is divided into 2 2s, and each 2 is divided into 2 1s, thereby re-establishing the monad. Among the key words of the ogdoad are love, counsel, prudence, law, and convenience. The ogdoad was a mysterious number associated with the Eleusinian mysteries of Greece and the Kabiri. It was called the Little Holy Number. It derived its form partly from the twisted snakes on the caduceus of Hermes, and partly from the serpentine motion of the celestial bodies, possibly also from the moon's nodes. And you'll see, if you're unfamiliar with the caduceus of Hermes, it's basically the symbol for healthcare nowadays, where you have the serpent going up and down the staff, which Hermes was always pictured with that staff, and it was a symbol of, knowledge, as the serpent usually is. The Aeneid, 9, was the first square of an odd number, 3 times 3. It was associated with failure and shortcoming because it fell short of the perfect number 10 by 1. It was called the number of man because of the 9 months of his embryonic life. Among its keywords are ocean, horizon, because to the ancients these were boundless. The Aeneid, however you say that, is a limitless number because there is nothing beyond it but the infinite 10. It was called boundary and limitation because it gathered all numbers within itself. It was called the sphere of the air because it surrounded the numbers as air surrounds the earth. Among the gods and goddesses who partook in greater or less degree of its nature were Prometheus, Vulcan, Juno, the sister and wife of Jupiter, Pan, Eglia, Tritogenia, Curites, Proserpine or Persephone, Hyperion, and Terpsichore. The 9 was looked upon as evil because it was an inverted 6. According to the Eleusinian mysteries, it was the number of the spheres through which the consciousness passed on its way to birth. Because of its close resemblance to the spermatozoon, the 9 has been associated with germinal life. The decad, 9, which is strange, because, thousands of years ago, how the hell did they know sperm looked like a 9? The decad, 10, according to the Pythagoreans, is the greatest of numbers, not only because it is the tetractys, but because it comprehends all arithmetic and harmonic proportions. Pythagoras said that 10 is the nature of number, because all nations reckon to it, and when they arrive at it, they return to the monad, or 1. The decad was called both heaven and the world, because the former includes the latter. Being a perfect number, the decad was applied by the Pythagoreans to those things relating to age, power, faith, necessity, and the power of memory. It was also called unwearied because, like God, it was tireless. The Pythagoreans divided the heavenly bodies into 10 orders. They also stated that the decad perfected all numbers and comprehended within itself the nature of odd and even, moved, unmoved, good and ill. They associated its power with the following deities: Atlas, for it carried the numbers on its shoulders, or the world; Urania, Mnemosyne, the sun, Phanes, and the one God. The decimal system can probably be traced back to the time when it was customary to reckon on the fingers, though these being among the most primitive of calculating devices and still in use among many aboriginal peoples. And that was from The Secret Teachings of All Ages. Now I'm going to take a little bit of a break because we're about half done. Alright, and I'm back. And the next reading will be from Occult Geometry and the Hermetic Science of Motion and Number by A.S. Raleigh. We'll start with the circle. The circle has from the earliest antiquity been employed as the symbol for eternity and unity. The circle is a line beginning at a point and traveling in a curve until it returns to the same point. Consequently, it has no beginning and no end. It is for this reason employed as the symbol of eternity, eternity being in the strict sense of the word beginningless and endless. Everlasting is not eternal for the reason that a thing may have a beginning, although having no end, but that which is eternal without beginning and without end. For this reason, the circle, which is geometrically the same as eternity in time, is employed as a symbol of eternity. Again, the circle is employed to symbolize the universe, for the universe is without beginning and without an end. There being no point where it begins and none where it ends. That is to say, there is nothing outside of the universe. It includes all things which in its own compass, and therefore it is symbolized by the circle. Again, the circle is used to symbolize fate or necessity. As there is no beginning and no end, as the circle of necessity revolves, sooner or later the point comes. Furthermore, it symbolizes repetition in history, all things repeating themselves from time to time, as the revolving returns to the same point. It also symbolizes the cyclical law, for as the wheel turns, the cycle returns again. Thus a new cycle begins, the cycle here being symbolized by each turn of the wheel, and so all through nature we find this continual repetition of the cyclical law. The circle is also used as a symbol of unity, representing the one which contains all things within itself. Differentiation is caused by the energy going in two directions, but as long as unity is preserved, the circular form must remain. It will be quite possible to realize the reason for using the circle as a symbol of unity when we understand that it is formed by reason of the circling of forces around its center of gravity, the center of gravity here being an imaginary point in the middle of the circle, equally distant from each part of the circle. In this sense, the circle is the form which energy assumes as it circles around its center of gravity. In other words, it is the figure of the whirl, and as all things in the universe originate in a whirl, in the whirl which goes to form the universe, it will, therefore, be seen that the circle, symbolizing the whirl, must perfectly represent the first creative impulse. It thus becomes a symbol of creation. Hold on, I lost my spot. The circle is the expression in the form of that idea. It is the circle which the idea takes, giving the circular motion of substance under the influence of the energy imparted by the idea. It, therefore, represents creation by the idea, likewise the creation of a single form by a single idea, in other words, specific as opposed to general creation. It must not be assumed that the circle has simply been employed in an arbitrary manner as the symbol of creation and unity. On the contrary, the creative idea cannot possibly express itself in any other form than that of the circle. The whirl being the first motion growing out of the idea, the fiat continues to whirl the substance under the energizing impulse of that idea. Therefore, creation must always be through the whirl. As energy operates upon substance through the whirl, it must at all times describe a circle. As long as that circle is maintained, no variation of the creative impulse is possible, hence simple creation must be the result. In order for differentiation of manifestation to take place, it is necessary that the motion should be altered from the circle to some variation corresponding to the new form. Therefore, the circle symbolizes creation and unity, it being the circular character of the motion which maintains the integrity of the creation, this guaranteeing the undifferentiated expression. As this circular motion is maintained, the tendency is to draw the energy acted upon this motion to that point where the velocity is the greatest. In other words, there is one direction of force represented by a whirling point. All substance responding in the slightest degree to this whirling point is at right angles due to the same, but by reason of the whirl is drawn after it, thus forming converging lines, resulting in so many currents of force flowing in the direction of, or gravitating to the whirling point, the result being a stream ever flowing toward the center, and at the same time moving in the direction of the central stream. This stream of energized substance is, therefore, crowding on that point of greatest energy, at the same time being guided in its whirl by that force. The result is, the center around which the energy is whirling becomes deserted, the substance all flowing outward from the center of force, the attraction of the center of force being sufficient to maintain the center of substance, resulting in the formation of a ring. Thus, the cosmic activity must express itself in a series of rings. It is utterly impossible for any homogeneous motion to manifest anything through form. For this reason, the circle has been employed as the symbol for the homogeneous, and as the substance will continue to whirl in this form until differentiation takes place, it will logically follow that the continuity of the first whirl must always perpetuate the circular form. The circle consequently symbolizes the symbol of unity and that of continuity, the two ideas, unity and continuity, being the foundation of eternity. Likewise, as there is no point in a circle stronger than another, as the energy is active at all points alike, we have no beginning, no energizing point, but the entire circle is gradually energizing itself. Thus we have an idea of eternity as something interactive as well as self-active. The circle has been used to symbolize creation because creation is through circular motion, to symbolize eternity because eternity is a circle having no beginning, and to symbolize unity because the circle is a unit of motion as the expression of unity of ideas. Likewise, the circle has been used as the symbol of God, of deity, and why? Because deity is self-derived, is not dependent upon another, and I'd like to interject here, this is not from the book, that one of the oldest symbols of God is the whirlwind. So that kind of matches up with this a little bit. But anyways, is not dependent, because deity is self-derived, is not dependent upon another, but has its center of gravity within itself, the beginning point of the divine being in himself, not in another. His motion is around a vacuum, that is, he does not revolve around anything else, but only around that which is not. God is his own center of gravity. For this reason he is symbolized by the circle. Divine energy must always flow in a circular form. Likewise, all manifestations of divinity, as so many circles revolving around the divine center, at the same time revolving within the divine circumference. Divinity is consequently described as a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. The circle again represents the universe as the macrocosm. Likewise, such manifestation as the microcosm. Again, every manifestation of the manifestation becomes circular. Thus we see the circular motion ever the manifestation of the homogeneous. One form of the circle is a serpent with its tail in its mouth, or the Ouroboros. The serpent is not a natural circle, but is ordinarily a line and having beginning and end, thus representing the law of opposites, but when he swallows his tail, the two opposites are brought together, are swallowed up by each other, or more usually, one of the opposites is swallowed by the other. Thus, in the conjunction of opposites, we have balance, which again expresses itself in the circle. Life everlasting is thus secured through the merging of the two homogeneous activities. In other words, the heterogeneous is swallowed up by the homogeneous, thus bringing differentiation back into unity. The end is swallowed up in the beginning, thus beginninglessness and endlessness are made possible. But there is this difference between the two circles. The true circle is an ever-expanding, manifesting circle, while the serpent circle becomes a contracting circle. It is the return to unity. It is differentiation, swallowing itself. This reuniting is unity. So here we go again. Everybody's one world over, all that. The true circle symbolizes evolution. The serpent circle involution, and in some instances devolution. It is the retrograde motion, which returns back, the throwback, in other words. It is for this reason that the serpent swallowing its tail has ever been associated with the idea of unity among those philosophers and religionists who originated the divine unity and undertook by their own power to bring unity out of diversity, this being the usurpation of the divine prerogative of man. Consequently, it must result in the expression of the destructive principle of nature. The serpent circle is, therefore, ever the symbol of the destructive, inversive magi, while the true circle is a symbol of the expansive, eternal, creative unity coming forth from the divine center. However, it does not symbolize manifestation in the sense of differentiation, but rather the direct creation of one thing from a single idea. That was a circle. We'll continue. The line. The line represents motion in two opposite directions. It is, consequently, the geometrical presentation of the law of opposites, the circle representing unity because motion in one direction. One motion will always move in a circle, but when two opposite motions are introduced, we have the line. We should realize that when a circle begins to move outward at the antipodes, it will gradually put forth 2 points which will, in time, draw out onto a line. Thus the line is motion moving from the center outward in 2 directions, thus forming 2 streams running at right angles to each other. These 2 streams are the result of the antagonistic vibratory impulses. Thus we have the introduction of the law of opposites moving right and left. The principles of duality instead of that of unity represented by the figure 2 instead of 1. What is it that causes the law of opposites? What causes this dual motion, these 2 directions of vibration? It is due to the 2 principles in nature, the electromagnetic differentiation. If there are only one principle undifferentiated, then there would be the continual circle. But when we have introduced these 2 principles, the electrical and magnetic, we have the positive and negative poles. These principles move in opposite directions. Thus we have the line. The line is really made up of atoms moving in a continuous stream, or it would be more proper to say they move in 2 continuous streams, for they do not move from one end to the other, but from the center to both ends. The line is thus like the preacher's prayer, commences in the middle and goes both ways. It is the positive and negative principle. All life, all existence is the manifestation of these 2 forces. The sex principle is here represented by this line, the masculine and feminine operative throughout all nature as well as in the individual. Wherever we see straight lines of force, we may know that we are observing the operation of the law of opposites. It is the great universal antagonism, the great controversy that is operative throughout all time and space, the antagonism between these 2 natural forces. The struggle itself expresses itself in 2 directions. We have here the extremes of good and evil. Good is that which unites, evil is that which separates. They are 2 principles working everywhere. Good is that principle in nature which makes for righteousness. Evil is the reverse. But the line illustrates the 2 directions and shows them to be simply the effects of motion in these 2 directions. I'd like to intercede again and remind everyone that this is not what I personally believe. The point of this series is to educate you on the teachings of the occult and religious systems of the world, not on my own personal beliefs. So when I'm saying these things, don't take it as, gospel truth, but these are just the teachings of one sect. And most of this is the occult world. And a lot of the occult world is driven by the mystery schools and secret societies. Anyways, the natural consequence of all manifestation is expression. The Zoroastrian doctrine of the 2 principles, good and evil, is shown by the line. Ormuzd and Ahriman, the eternal principle of good and evil. But there is another point of theology that is illustrated by the line. In the old Zend religion, when we go back far enough, we find that Ormuzd and Ahriman are both emanations from one being. Ahriman is not a creation of Ormuzd, but is co-eternal with him, and they are both emanations from one source. Thus we have in the first divine aspect neither good nor evil. There is no such thing as moral differentiation, but on the contrary, The two are perfectly united in one, or rather are unmanifest, undifferentiated. We have in this first divine aspect a being who is neither good nor evil. Now he sends forth the good emanation which Ormuzd, a being whose nature is essentially good. Ahriman, on the contrary, is another emanation whose nature is essentially evil. These are the two expressions of one and the self-same spirit. Those manifestations must express themselves through differentiation. Now, this doctrine is perfectly represented by the line, for it has two emanations going forth from the circle being the principle of unity, having no quality save in accepting that of circularity. When the two impulses are imparted, we have the energy going forth, the two impulses, the two emanations. Thus imparted, we have the energy going forth, thus drawing out the circle into a line. The line is simply the extension from the point in the middle, and is capable of infinite extension. Good and evil may thus be developed ad infinitum, and yet the farther they go in their development, the farther apart they become. We see the fallacy of the idea that one may become good by doing evil, the doctrine of doing evil that good may result. Good can never result from evil, for the reason that evil is traveling in a geometrically opposite direction to good. Thus the end of the line, which represents the point of development, is continually receding farther from the center. Thus the one who is doing evil is going farther and farther from the one who is doing good. The line does not describe a circle, no matter how far it goes, but is continually lengthening at right angles to the other end. The eternal opposition is thus going on, and all further manifestation must, in the nature of things, be dependent upon this opposition. Not only is this true of the one who is doing a good, but also an evil, for it must be borne in mind that good and evil are really cosmic principles. They are not simply actions. Actions are but the expression of these comic principles. The gods, Ormuzd and Ahriman, are not persons, but personifications of natural powers. Here we get into it. As such, they are to be understood as being powers actually operative in nature, forces, energies, in fact. They are in reality the electromagnetic force expressing itself in the form of moral relations, and in order to understand this connection, it must always be borne in mind that the only real basis of morality or immorality is in the attitude toward that which is neither moral nor immoral, towards that which transcends all moral relation. This great mystery, the mystery of ethics, is thus solved in the line. It is not true that there is political ethics or utilitarian ethics or anything of that kind. The basis of ethics is shown to be the relation of the relative to the absolute. Were there no absolute code of ethics, there could be no ethical foundation, for everything relates to the undifferentiated, to the circle, the unity, the divine oneness. When we come to consider this matter, we can understand why it is that there have been ethical systems galore, and yet no unity, no agreement, no harmony. It is because they have failed to recognize the central principle of unity to the foundation for all expression. The relative must ever be viewed in relation to the absolute. Good and evil are, therefore, two kinds of forces operative in the universe, ever antagonistic, and their antagonism is due to the fact that they are the same force moving in two opposite directions under the impulse of the one principle in its twofold aspect. Light and darkness, another pair of opposites, are simply two different kinds of motion. Darkness is not the absence of light any more than light is the absence of darkness. They are two kinds of vibration. They are at right angles to each other. Now that we are to understand that they move through space at right angles, for the line applies to a great many more things than simply space. Wherever there are two motions at right angles, they are represented by the line, and when we use the term right angles here, we simply mean two opposite aspects. Paracelsus taught that darkness was due to the radiation of certain dark stars, which radiated darkness such as the ordinary stars radiate light, and the fool scientists have supposed he meant what he said, that he meant literally to claim that there were stars radiating darkness. This shows how ridiculous it is for physicists to attempt to explain the teachings of mysteries. What Paracelsus meant was that darkness had a source quite as definite as light. that it was a positive quality and not a mere negative one. It is a radiation, that is, it is the expression of a certain motion, and when we have come to realize this, we will then understand why it is that darkness has its occult influence the same as light, that is, quite as indefinite as light, being just the reverse. Also, we speak of spiritual darkness because it is the expression of the other end of the line than spiritual light. Spiritual light is not used simply as a term to represent good. It is good, and spiritual darkness, as the opposite of light or good, is positively evil. These expressions could not be otherwise. They perfectly illustrate the real truth concerning the matter. Heat and cold, all those other opposites, are seen to be merely opposing vibratory forces, vibration, going in two different directions, thus becoming the source of the twofold manifestation. The course of emanation in this particular respect. When it acts in another way, it becomes the sex principle, thus male and female constituting another aspect of emanation, another pair of opposites. When this becomes specialized in organic beings, it becomes the sex energy, and the means into the perpetuation of the race. Wherever we turn, we see the expression of this twofold vibrating force, which is in fact the law of opposites, the electromagnetic positive and negative principle, which principle is the cause of the dual activities of the universe. The twofold aspect of the dual activities of the universe. That was weird. The twofold aspect of nature is but the expression of the law of opposites, the eternal two, symbolized by the line. Here we have nature not as a unit, but as a duality, as positive and negative poles. This dual force emanating in two directions thus becomes the means of extending the unity ad infinitum. Until the positive-negative, the electromagnetic differentiation by emanation begins, no other emanation can take place. This must be the first step in the direction of manifestation. Thus we have presented to us the beginning of creation by emanation. It is this that is symbolized by the line, because it is the line. Alright, now the triangle. The triangle symbolizes the law of balance and is geometrically the equal to the number 3, which we learned earlier. The law of opposites in the triangle is balanced, thus making deity. It is in this sense that it is said that in the Trinity, duality becomes unity, the 3 in 1 and 1 in 3. As we learned in the previous lesson, all force divides itself into the positive and negative, or rather the electrical and magnetic, which are mutually positive and negative. We have then, first, a positive and second, a negative, expressing themselves in two directions of force. Vibrating in these two directions, the line is produced, due to the repulsion of force from a central point going outward in two directions. As long as these two vibratory impulses are all that are operative, we have the line. But there is a third, which is neuter, being neither positive nor negative, or more properly speaking, both positive and negative. This becomes the balancing force, the binding, interlacing, attaching principle, which instead of repelling the two principles, forms the center, draws them into the center. In one sense it is, therefore, true that this is really the negative principle, whereas the other two are both positive, one being positively electrical and the other positively magnetic. This third is negative, both to the electrical and to the magnetic. The first and second are centrifugal, the third is centripetal. Thus we have this neuter principle, which is negative to both the electric and the magnetic, which draws in everything to its center. In this way we have the uniting of the two forces, their balancing in a common center, so that this union has been made possible. When they unite in the common center, they thus accomplish the balancing of the other opposing forces, becoming one. We have thus repeated in the divine name the Yod, being the electrical principle, and He, the magnetic principle. These two principles are thus in opposition, but the Va, a nail, an attachment, a fastening, unites the two, thus they become one. Why does the triangle symbolize this union, this interlacement? First, imagine a point emanating two opposite forces. One will go to the right, the other to the left. And as a matter of fact, the right hand is the electrical, and the left hand the magnetic pole in man and in everything else. A current of electricity is streaming to the right and a current of magnetism to the left from this common point, thus forming a line at right angles. Now place another point opposite the central point of this line, but in advance of it and some distance away, sufficiently far in advance of the line to equal the length of the line, because this is to be negatived to both these forces. The attractive power must be as great and no greater than is the repulsive power of the other point. Thus you advance your balancing point far enough to equal the length of the line. It, therefore, attracts the force of the two ends of the line with equal power. By reason of this attraction, the force is deflected from the regular path and caused to flow in the direction of this attraction. We have, therefore, force flowing in right angles from the central point, deflected from this right angle path in such a way as to flow inward to a point corresponding to that point. Damn, that's a lot of points. From whence it first flowed, and the right angled path draw to this point by reason of the attraction which is equal both for the electric and the magnetic. Thus we have a perfect triangle formed by the activity of these three forces. The electric and the magnetic are now united in one given point. We have the perfect triangle, which therefore symbolizes the law of balance, as being the balancing of the electrical and the magnetic principles. The eternal warfare between the pair of opposites has ceased. A truce has been made between the two. It is for this reason that the triangle has ever been employed to symbolize the law of balance, that is, the balancing of the two antagonistic principles. It is thus Trinity and Unity and Trinity. But it must not be understood that this is simply an arbitrary symbol, because whenever two forces unite in one, whenever the pair of opposites come together, thus forming a unity, which is the result of the combination of those pairs of opposites, we have the triangle formed. As long as force does not manifest, it always operates in this triangular form. There are the two directions of force brought together again by reason of the uniting in the third principle, forming the triangle. But what is the cause of this attraction? Are we to understand that there is another force besides the electric and magnetic, a force in nature apart from the eternal law of opposites? No. This would be an error. Nothing exists in all nature but the two principles, and the various manifestation of the same. There is no third principle to be postulated in the sense of the electric and magnetic. There is, therefore, no attractive principle out there to produce the other point of the triangle. What, then, is it that causes the 2 points or ends of the line to be so deflected as to come together, forming the triangle? It is a law of physics that 2 electric atoms, or molecules, or 2 magnetic atoms, or molecules, or electrons, will repel, but an electric and a magnetic atom, electron, or molecule will usually attract. Therefore, the 2 forces are streaming forth, the electric flowing to the right, the magnetic to the left. The centrifugal force drives both currents outward. At the same time, the electrical current has an affinity for the magnetic current, and the magnetic for the electric. The tendency, therefore, is for the electrical to draw the magnetic to it, and the magnetic to draw the electric. At the same time, the atoms, or electrons in the current, by reason of the repulsive force, drive all those in advance of them still further onward. They cannot turn back because of the repulsion coming from those electrons behind them. Thus a return to the central point is impossible. Not only is this true, but the centrifugal force itself will not permit them to return for the reason that it has an antipathy for the electrons and is driving them ever onward in this right angle path. To return the same way they came is impossible. It is likewise impossible for them to travel on indefinitely. Because of the mutual attraction of the 2 currents. As the centrifugal force drives them outward and the centripetal force drives them inward, they are, in the very nature of things, caused to deflect from their regular course, made to pass inward until they again meet in a point opposite that point from which they proceeded. Thus we have the triangle formed as the inevitable result of the centrifugal and centripetal forces operating in the electric and magnetic principle. These principles, without a third, operate in harmony with the law of opposites and the law of balance as well. It is therefore a case of emanation from the opposite forces until the point is reached where the negative force becomes stronger. At this point, the negative force begins to draw them inward, but the positive force is strong enough to cause the point of union to be equidistant from the two ends, and at the same time at a distance equal to twice the space of deflection in a single principle, forming the perfect triangle. The triangle, however, must not be conceived of as being simply triangular in shape. It is also a triangle in power, where the forces are absolutely equal. Its strength is the same, the two principles, electric and magnetic, being equally powerful and uniting so as to perpetuate the absolute balance without a superior. In fact, the entire universe is a triangle, for the two principles of the divine essence are emanated to the divine will, reaching that outward point or emanation where the force of will becomes less than the force of desire. The heart of God there causes a return to this force of desire, the tartness or harshness, as Boehme terms it. Returning to God, the point is reached where the force coming inward produces what Boehme terms the flash, growing out of the sting or prickle, whereas, again, the force is thrown out. Thus we have the process of creation, involution, and evolution, a perpetual triangle, the two forces being driven outward and then drawn inward to the twofold force, will and desire, until unity is reached. When unity has been reached, it becomes positive, reverses the process, causing the forces to flow outward positively until desire has become stronger than will, when it returns again. Thus we have the triangle ever reversing itself. We have here the explanation of cycles of involution and evolution. It has been known to metaphysicians and mystics in all ages that the processes of the universe are through cycles of involution and evolution. It is not a gradual process, but a cycle where every tendency is emanative, followed by one where everything is expressive of the return. One cycle represents the descent of spirit into matter, the next the rise of matter into spirit. This problem is solved by the triangle. The spirit's descent into matter is when the will of God is emanating creation. The evolution of matter into spirit is when the heart of God is drawing all things inward. Thus, Manvantara and Pralaya are shown to be perfectly true by the triangle. Manvantara being the positive will of God, Pralaya being the negative heart of God. These two forces do not act antagonistically so much as alternately, although of course they are both active, but on alternate days one is stronger than the other. A day of Brahma is shown to be the period when the will is the heart plus, Pralaya is when it is the heart minus. It is another illustration of the world-old problem of the fatal children destroying their parents, for it is only by reason of the work achieved by the positive will that it becomes so weakened that the negative desire is able to overcome it, and when the negative desire has accomplished its purpose, it is then overcome by the positive will. Each accomplishes its work, and by reason of this fact is so weakened as to become subject to the greater dominance of the other principle. The eternal triangle is therefore the form, both physically and metaphysically expressed, of the great struggle between will and desire, the struggle between the positive and negative principles. The triangle is expressed in the Spirit of God in the divine essence. For this reason, we have the three principles in the divine essence. Again, we find it in the universal spirit expressing itself through Brahma, or the creative force, Shiva, or the destructive force, Vishnu, or the binding, uniting force. The perfect blending and harmonizing of the two, producing harmony and balance. Again, in nature, we find the Trinity expressing itself through electricity and magnetism, united in the creation, which is the expression of both. We have in man the human triangle. On all the planets of nature expressed as electricity and magnetism. The positive and negative forces with the uniting of the two expressed in the human soul. Thus we have the divine triangle, the spiritual triangle, the cosmic triangle, and the human triangle. It is for this reason that the Trinity has from time immemorial been recognized by occult scientists as the key to all the mysteries. Not the Trinity of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, but the Trinity of the three principles in each and every being. The number 3 is therefore the Masonic principle, the number of the perfect man as the one containing in himself the two principles united. Thus we have in the triangle the law of opposites, involving all the 10 pairs of opposites united and unified in the law of balance. It being a perfect triangle, that is, all 3 lines being equal, we would understand that unity is as dependent upon one of these forces as upon the other. One is just as necessary as the other. By applying the triangle to the 10 pairs of opposites, we will be able to form a triangle for each of them, letting the positive one represent the electrical principle, the negative the magnetic. Establish this state of mutual attraction, and thus draw at a point where the two become one. You will in this way have formed the triangle of which light and darkness are the 2 extremes, also one of which the 2 extremes are good and evil, dry and wet, hot and cold, stationary and moving, square and oblong, male and female, and so on with all the other pairs of opposites. They will represent the 2 points of opposition and the harmonizing point between. The union, the marriage between the opposites, for the triangle simply means the marriage of the 2 opposites, resulting in unity. And that was from Occult Geometry and Hermetic Science of Motion and Number. Now, let's see. Where should we go from here? Now I'm going to go through some interesting things where these strange numbers prop up and what they mean. Anyways, we're going to go into the Bible, the book of John, chapter 21. After these things, Jesus shewed himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias, and on this wise showed he himself. There were together Simon Peter and Thomas, called Didymus, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other of his disciples. Simon Peter says to him, saith unto them, I go a fishing. They say unto him, We also go with thee. They went forth and entered into a ship immediately, and that night they caught nothing. But when the morning was now come, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples knew not that it was Jesus. Then Jesus saith unto them, Children, have you any meat? They answered him, No. And he said unto them, Cast the net on the right side of the ship, and ye shall find. They cast therefore, and now they were not able to draw it for the multitude of fish. Therefore that disciple whom Jesus loved saith unto Peter, It is the Lord. Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he girt his fisher's coat, and did cast himself into the sea. And the other disciples came in a little ship, for they were not far from land, but as it were 200 cubits, dragging the net with fish. As soon as they were come to the land, they saw a fire of coals there, and fish laid thereon, and bread. Jesus saith unto them, Bring of the fish which ye have now caught. Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land full of great fishes, 153. 153. And for all there were so many, yet was not the net broken. Jesus saith unto them, Come and dine. And none of the disciples durst ask him, Who art thou? Knowing that it was the Lord. Jesus then cometh and taketh bread and giveth them, and fish likewise. This is from Wikipedia about this number. The precision of the number of fish in this narrative has long been considered peculiar. and many scholars throughout history have argued that 153 has some deeper significance. Jerome, for example, wrote that Oppian's Haleutica listed 153 species of fish, although this could not have been the intended meaning of the Gospel writer, because Oppian composed Haleutica after the Gospel text was written, and at any rate never gave a list of fish species that clearly adds up to 153. It has also been noted that the Tetragrammaton, or the Holy Name of God, occurs 153 times in the book of Genesis. Augustine of Hippo argued that the significance lay in the fact that 153 is the sum of the first 17 integers, with 17 representing the combination of divine grace. Theologian D.A. Carson discusses this and other interpretation and concludes that if the evangelist has some symbolism in mind connected with the number 153, he has hidden it well. While other scholars note no symbolic significance for the number of 153 fish in John 21:11 has received widespread support. Writers claiming a major role for Mary Magdalene have noted that in Greek, her epithet bears the number 8 plus 40 plus 1 plus 3 plus 4 plus 1 plus 30 plus 8 plus 50 plus 8 equals 153. Thus it is suggested, revealing her importance. Similarly, the phrase, the net, used in the passage bears the number 1224, which is the product of 8 times 153. The significance of this is unclear, given that the Greek provides a chance of several noun endings. The number 153 has also been related to the Vesica Pisces, with the claim that Archimedes used 153 as a shorthand or abbreviation for the square root of 3 in his On the Measurement of the Circle. However, examination of that work does not find the number 153 used in that way. Evagrius Ponticus referred to the catch of 153 fish as well as to the mathematical properties of the number when describing his 153 chapter work on prayer. And that's from Wikipedia, and I'll just give you what I believe the 153 to actually mean, which, if you take the square root of 153, it equals 12.369, or the number of full moons in a year. Full moons. What does that have to do with fish and the tide and the water? You can do your own research. Alright, we go into Luke 22, the King James Version. 22, verse 2. And the chief priests and scribes sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people. Then entered Satan into Judas, surnamed Iscariot, being of the number of the 12. And he went his way and communed with the chief priests and captains, how he might betray him to them. And they were glad, and covenanted to give him money. And he promised, and tradition has it that this is 33 pieces of silver, or 30 pieces of silver. And he promised and sought opportunity to betray him into them in the absence of the multitude. Then came the day of unleavened bread, when the Passover must be killed. And he sent Peter and John, saying, Go and prepare us the Passover, that we may eat. And he said to them, Where wilt thou that we prepare? And he said to him, okay, now the Passover is like, you take it back to a certain level, and it's basically when God passed over the houses of the Jews, and you take it back even farther, and it's a Passover of the sun. So here you can probably tell with we're going to get into the astrology and the zodiac. Anyways, and he said to him, Behold, when you are entered into the city, there shall a man meet you, bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him into the house where he enters in. A man bearing a pitcher of water, which, for thousands of years the symbol of the sign of Aquarius, which comes right after the sign of the fishes, or the Pisces. The man with the water bearing is the sign of Aquarius. We get past that. And you shall say to the good man of the house, the master says to thee, where is the guest chamber? Where shall I eat the Passover with my disciples? And he shall show you a large upper room. There make ready. And they went and found, as he said to them, and they made ready the Passover. And when the hour was come, he sat down, and the 12 apostles with him. And he said to them, with desire I have desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I say unto you, I will not eat any more thereof until it be fulfilled in the kingdom of God. And he took the cup and gave thanks, and said, take this, and divide it amongst yourselves. For I say unto you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God shall come. And he took bread and gave thanks, and brake it, and gave to them, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. This do in remembrance of me. Likewise also the cup after the supper, saying, this cup is the New Testament in my blood, which is shed for you. But behold, the hand of him that betrays me is with me on the table. And truly the Son of Man goes as it was determined, but woe unto that man by whom he is betrayed. And they began to inquire among themselves, which of them it was that should do this thing. And there was also a strife among them, which of them should be accounted the greatest. And he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and they that exercise authority upon them are called benefactors. But ye shall not be so, but he that is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he that is chief as he that does serve. For whether is greater, he that sits at meat, or he that serves meat? Well, I added the meat. Is not he that sitteth at meat? But I am among you as he that serveth. Ye are they which have continued with me in temptations, in my temptations. And I appoint unto you a kingdom, as my Father has appointed to me, that ye may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So you have the 12 apostles judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has desired to have you, that ye may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not, and when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren. And he said unto him, Lord, I am ready to go with thee, both into prison and to death. And he said, I tell thee, Peter, the cock shall not crow this day, before that thou shalt thrice deny that thou knowest me. And he said to them, when I sent you without purse and scrip and shoes, lacked ye anything? And they said, nothing. And then said he unto them, but now he that hath a purse, let him take it, and likewise his scrip. And he that has no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. For I say unto you that this that is written must yet be accomplished in me. And he was reckoned among the transgressors, for the things concerning me have an end. And they said, Lord, behold, here are 2 swords. And he said to them, it is enough. And he came out and went, as he was wont, to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples also followed him. And when he was at the place, he said to them, pray that ye enter not into temptation. And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's cast, and kneeled down and prayed, saying, Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. And there appeared an angel unto them from heaven, strengthening him. And being in an agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was as it were great drops of blood falling to the ground. And when he rose up from prayer, and was come to his disciples, he found them sleeping for sorrow. And he said to them, Why sleep ye? Rise and pray, lest ye enter into temptation. And while he yet spake, behold, a multitude, and he that was called Judas, one of the 12, went before him, and drew near to Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, Judas, betrayest thou the Son of Man with a kiss? The next is from William Cooper, Hour of the Time, Mystery Babylon series. In the ancient world, months were counted according to the phases of the moon.
They were called lunar months on the lunar calendar. Now, Scorpio, or the Scorpion, is the astrological sign starting in late October, the first month of autumn. It follows that October, the Scorpion, with his deadly backbiting tail, betrays the sun in autumn, leading directly to his death in winter, and is known as Judas, and that's where the October surprise comes from. And the 30 pieces of silver were, as the North American Indians would say, 30 moons of silver needed for the month to betray the sun and cause his unhappy death. In relation to this, another interesting point. Factually speaking, when a person is bitten by a deadly scorpion, the wound appears to be, or looks like, 2 human lips. The ancients called this the kiss of death. This is why we read that Judas, or October, gives God's Son the kiss leading to his death in winter.
Interesting. Very, very, very interesting. And it only took us 2 hours and 15 minutes to get to something interesting. But anyways, I'm going to go into some numbers. I could probably do about 5 more shows on sacred geometry and mystic numbers, but it's just, I think if you listen to this show and you get a feel for it, you'll be better apt to study it yourself. But anyways, I'm going to go into some different interesting numbers that have weird trends going along with them. 33. The sun sets on the 33rd degree. God's Son began his ministry at 30 and died at 33. The divine name Elohim appears 33 times in the story of creation in the opening chapters of Genesis. King David ruled for 33 years. Jesus performed 33 miracles. The eagle on the seal of the United States has 33 feathers on his left wing and 32 on his right. Human beings resonate at 33 times the resonance of the earth, or what they call the Schumann resonance. On the Grand Masonic Temple in Washington, D.C., there are 33 pillars holding up the roof, with each of them being 33 feet in height. In the Newtonian scale, Newton defined zeroth, degree of heat, as melting snow, and 33 degrees of heat as boiling water. On the UN emblem of the world, it is divided into 33 sections. The sun rises at the 30th degree, but is not totally clear until the 33rd degree. The highest degree in Freemasonry is the 33rd degree, and no man can rise higher than the sun. Number 72. It takes 72 years for the sun to process by 1 degree. 72% of the human body is water. 72 languages were spoken at the Tower of Babylon. The conventional number of scholars translating the Septuagint. The conventional number of disciples sent forth by Jesus in Luke 10 in some manuscripts. The number of the names of God according to the Kabbalah, which is all based on the Yod He Vod He, there should be a picture up that shows that. The number of warriors on the Muslim side at the Battle of Badr. The number of people martyred along with Imam Hussein at the Battle of Karbala. The 72 old men of the synagogue, according to the Zohar. The number of virgins each Muslim martyr shall receive as companions in paradise. The degrees of the Jacob's ladder were the number of 72, according to the Zohar. Confucius had 72 disciples. Thoth, in the Egyptian creation myth, wins a 72nd of each day of the year from the moon. Osiris was enclosed in a coffin by 72 evil disciples and accomplices of Set, or Typhon. 72 is the number of the immortals of Taoism. In Cao Dai, the number of planets between hell and heaven. Interesting. 72. What is this 72? And the next one is 81, 18, 1080. They're very common together. The lunar radius of the moon is 1,080 miles, and this all has to do with the moon, which is interesting. The moon moves through space 81 times faster than planet Earth. The moon is 1/81st of the Earth's mass. Silver, always symbolized by the moon, has an atomic mass of 108 grams per mole. Rosary beads dedicated to the Virgin Mary, or Japa Malus beads of the Hindus and Buddhists, all have usually 108 beads on them. Very interesting. What is this? 81, 18, 108, all having to do with the moon. Interesting. Another interesting thing about the moon is that we are the only planet that has a solar eclipse that looks like the one we do here because of the perfect proportions to the moon, the sun, and the earth. Anyways, and this is from, actually I can't find the link now, but I've seen this written several other places. It'll be the end of the Mystery Babylon numbers. Well, I guess this isn't a Mystery Babylon series, it's just the Occult Religion series, but still. I'll probably do another one of these to further, help people get some answers. Anyways, the figure the ancients used to define the circumference of the earth came from their foot and their cubit. These two numbers, 1,296 and 864, are basic to many ancient systems of measure. Is it a coincidence that a circle of 1,296,000 units has a radius of 206,265 units, the length of both an English and an Egyptian cubit? The Hebrew shekel weighs 129.6 grams, the English guinea 129.6 grains, and the measure of the Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple was 1,296 inches. 129,600 is the numeric basis for astronomical measure and played a role in Plato's mystic symbolism. Multiples and submultiples of da-da-da-da-da-da. Yeah. I guess that's it for that. Another interesting piece. I should have gone into it earlier with the cube. Just something else to ponder. The cube. The Holy of Holies of Judaism in the Temple of Solomon was a cube. The Muslims, or Islam, go to Mecca and they do 7 processions around a black cube. Apollo and Artemis, when they were born, were given the task by the Oracle of Delphi of doubling the cube for their altar. In Christianity, New Jerusalem is set up by a cube. Anyways, that's the end of this episode. I hope if you even made it this far, I'm impressed. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.